All right, In the Bushes, episode 3, probably the most requested guest of all time, Brandon Young, El Jefe, as we like to call him. A lot of people don't know this about Brandon, but he actually went on tour with Celine Dion, I think back in 1988, was it, Brandon?
The rumors.
Is that right?
Yeah, thanks, Lee.
That actually was a request by Lee Welch. The guy's a legend. But I think what's really cool about this place, and we've kind of said in the previous podcast, but Brandon, what you do a good job of is you allow it to be fun in here. I think all of us, as that work in here, make it. It's important to us because it keeps it light. We like to have a good time. We get a lot of good stuff done. But if you want to speak on that and why you like your workers to have a good time in house and what kind of culture that brings.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. There's probably multiple answers to it. One, everyone here is handpicked. They go through a rigorous evaluation process to kind of make the cut. And at the end of the day, work is work. So if you can get guys to have a good time and look forward to coming in, the care that they're going to take is going to be exceptional. They're going to be able to kind of weather the heavy storm of the high volume times and being very busy and be okay with it. In the down times, to be able to mesh as a group and become more of a team is important. The guys that are in the trenches are the guys you got to look after, look out for. And I know how it feels to be in the trenches. So, a lot of the business has been built off biblical principles, even more so than my own life. And so the golden rule there is do to others as you would have done unto you. And when I was in the trenches, I remember how I felt and how I was treated. And, I learned how not to treat people, to be honest. And so I wanted to do things differently. So when you bring in exceptional people like what we have here, you allow them the freedom to do what you're paying them to do. And everyone here is better than me at something. So for me to make guys into robots and, have a robotic staff, this place wouldn't be near what it is if I did that.
Sure. And I see a quote around here a lot, and it's make good decisions. And I like to call that one of your Youngisms, because that's kind of something you come up with. And I think it's a great quote for really daily life and like just how you live. I mean, just literally everything you have in front of you is a decision, and make a good one. Don't mess it up. And I think you can take that into work, life, your relationships, whatever it may be. And I think that's a pretty cool quote that you have. Like, you want to speak on that at all? Where did that come from?
I couldn't really honestly tell you the origin of it. It just was always a parting quote that I would say to every patient, to every pitcher.
Yeah, if you've worked with Brandon, you've definitely heard that.
Yeah, it is. It's a Youngism, dude.
Yeah.
They would do their therapy session with me or pitching, and I'd stretch them out. And when we're done and we've said what we need to say, make good decisions.
I love it. And one more Youngism, and this is what I've heard from another one from Lee, I think it was. But don't forget your forearms. What do you got on that? What is that?
So throwing days are always high load, right?
Uh-huh.
So at the end of those days, that's when you want to fatigue your forearms to max, so that on your off days they can recover.
What's the science behind that, if you don't mind me asking?
So 55% is your UCL for stability of the medial elbow. I want to say 25%. This is just, don't quote me on it. It's like the lateral column or your radiocapitellar joint. And you have about 13 to 15% that comes from the musculature. So that's really what we can control.
Okay.
So in that 13 to 15%, make it as good as you can. So the stability of the forearm muscles, they're proven to provide stability there. So if that's your armor against Tommy John, then hey, let's make that part of the religion.
Love it. Well, I'm talking about forearms and something that you're passionate about. I think that kind of goes underlooked is video games, and I think forearms and video games kind of go hand in hand. Grip strength, finger dexterity. So just, if you don't mind, tell the people about Halo and how good you are at it. I've heard a lot of great stories. Actually Mason, who we had on last, recently played with Brandon, and I quote him and he said, "Brandon's nasty." So, Brandon, if you want to just hit on that really quick, I'd love to hear it.
So by nature, I'm very analytical, and I am a long-time Halo fan. Like that's Halo and NCAA football, which has been discontinued. It's supposed to come back in 2024, which I'm hype about.
So am I.
But Halo is, when it came out, I think back in 2001, I was in college, and college buddies, we just had a great time with that, and it's carried through the years. So it's something I enjoy. Definitely hand-eye coordination. That game is well balanced and it tests you, and I'm feeling my age because these younger kids. I had to step it up. That dexterity, it challenges my brain to work faster. But it's definitely, I wouldn't say be unhealthy with it, but there's a lot of research out there that backs up that video games are good for neurological gains.
How so? How would you explain that? Because I agree. I mean, I played video games all growing up and still do a little bit. And I mean, I would love to think that that's the case.
Reaction time.
Yeah.
So from processing it to making your hands do exactly what they need to do is also neuromuscular control. So one of the hardest things is to do multiple functions with the Master Chief. To be able to strafe and duck and still shoot accurately. You've got to have multiple movements of the fingers.
Yeah.
And if I can't have this neuromuscular control of maybe my index finger, my middle finger, I'm dead. Or I'm not going to progress in the game.
Is there an age to where there's more benefit to that? Because I know there's probably a lot of kids right now. I'd probably say age group 9 to 15. Actually, Grant plays a lot of Fortnite still, doesn't he, at 23? So I'm sure a lot of guys are out there saying, "See, mom and dad, I told you, video games are good for me," because Brandon says so.
Everything in moderation.
Everything
Everything in moderation. But I am a big advocate of video games, and the research is really starting to pile in that it is good, especially as we age.
Yeah.
There's studies that are showing as we age, and to be honest, it'd probably be if in traumatic brain injuries or strokes, if they integrate that, I guarantee you the results would be positive because of the connection of the brain to the hands and just processing that information and being able to make quick decisions.
There are two things I've seen you be passionate about. Baseball, obviously number one. Halo, definitely.
Halo's up there.
Definitely up there.
Snowboarding, deep snow,
Yeah, I want to talk about that too. That's something you do every year is you go snowboard. And that you said that kind of allows you to reset and to kind of plan for the year and to almost refresh yourself and you that's like your idea center almost. You go up there to Oregon. Was it what mountain?
Yeah, Mount Hood.
Mount Hood, and then all of a sudden it's I come back and I just feel energized and I have these ideas. And what do you think it is about snowboarding or just being out in the snow that kind of gives you that, hey, I'm ready to go, I'm back kind of feeling?
And every year it's been a reset for me. As a kid, I loved snow. Grew up in North Carolina, so we didn't get much. My extended family is in Northern Maryland, so when they get 2 or 3 feet, I would be very jealous. And so for whatever reason, I can't really tell you why, it's just something I always enjoyed, and the more the merrier for me. One of the trips up to Hood, I think we got spanned there in 2008, we got 15 feet. That was insane. And I was just like a kid in the candy store. But snowboarding, I didn't start till I was 27, and I go once a year, so it's really difficult to get good at that. Anyone that snowboarded, when you catch an edge, you learn quick that hurts.
Yeah.
But that board is a connection. It's you and the board, and it's these slopes. And it is, for me, I'm challenging anxiety and fear because I don't like getting hurt, right? So it's a challenge for me. It's me against me on the slopes, and there's nothing else on my mind. It's very clear. It's a challenge. And the environment out there is phenomenal. The views are phenomenal. The snow is very good. So it's a complete reset. There, during the time up there is probably some Halo involved, which also takes me out of the current grind of everything going on in life.
Yeah.
It's like my time. It's a reset. And the vision seems to be a bit clear. You're out of the weeds. Your head's above. You kind of see. It's a reflection of what has led to that point. And usually that trip is at the end of what I would call our fiscal year, because we've gone through the off season. The pros have returned to spring training. The high school kids are starting high school baseball. So it's the end of the fiscal year, and it's the beginning of our off season. How do we make what was good better?
Yeah.
What do we need to add to help guys that maybe struggled,
Sure.
or find solutions to problems that still exist?
Yeah, and that's something I feel like you say a lot is let's find solutions to people's problems. Just the other day we were talking about that and how important that is, because a lot of people out there can just sit there and be like, okay, this is why you're doing it, but there's really no research or data behind it. I think what makes this place and what makes what you do so special is that, okay, I'm not okay with just telling you something. Like, I'm going to find out what it is, and I'm going to do everything in my freaking power to do that. And I think that's what makes this place so special, is that we have all these tools. The 3D, which we're going to touch on here in a minute, is a huge factor in that. But we're going to find out what it is, and we're going to give it everything that we have. And I think that's what, again, kind of separates us and what makes this place just special, really.
It's the why. I mean, a lot of people could tell you what they think you need to do, but can't tell you why you need to do it. So
yeah, and kind of going off that, Brandon, I want to give you some time to, you mentioned the beginning, right? And when I think about this place, there's a lot of questions that I think a lot of people have about how this started. Because at the end of the day, started off as a PT, right? We know that you were a high school stud. You threw pretty hard, had TJ, and from there, how did this happen? How did we end up where we are now?
So, yeah, baseball was everything to me. It's funny, I'll tell a funny story or two along the way, but I didn't start playing baseball till I was 11.
Sure.
I think at age 10, I told my dad I want to go play baseball, and he said, well, let's go out in the front yard and have a tryout. And he threw the ball straight up in the air, and I got underneath it, and didn't hit the glove. It hit my nose and busted it. I had a bloody nose.
Good start.
And I decided that year that baseball wasn't right.
How old were you? What'd you say?
10.
10? All right.
And so at age 11, I want to try again. It was my first year playing baseball. Just like any Little League program, they had an MVP and a sportsmanship award. And at the end of the year, of course, I didn't win either of those. But the kids in the league had voted me the worst player in the league.
They did not.
They got together.
Way.
They got together, and it had at least 4 or 5 tell me that I won that award.
Cutthroat.
And so that ignited a passion in me.
Yeah.
And there was not a day that went by that I didn't throw a ball. So 12-year-old season rolls around. I go undefeated on the mound, win the championship, and I won the MVP and sportsmanship award. And
the most improved, obviously.
Right.
Most improved player award.
Didn't matter what they voted me at that point. And it wasn't a vengeful type thing. It was like, these guys are right.
Yeah.
I struggled, as this game is new to me, and it's, as everyone here that plays baseball knows, it's a highly skilled game.
Yeah.
So you got to spend time with it. But I learned then that, if there's a passion and there's a work ethic, that almost anything can be done. Mm-hmm. And I would say in the high school years, I could throw hard. I was known to be able to throw hard. I could throw, to entertain, I would frequently throw the baseball out of Cary High School. I'd throw it over
From
the
where?
fence.
From home plate? Or
Yeah.
From home plate?
Yeah, I'd throw it.
How far is that? Chris?
335 in left and 350 in center. And
Okay.
I would throw it out. My sophomore year, I can't remember who I pitched against, but one of the seniors said, you can't keep doing this. You're going to hurt yourself. And I felt like I had the rubber arm. But I pitched a complete game. The next day, the first launch, I felt a sharp pain in my elbow.
First launch? Like the throw?
Throw the long toss.
Yeah.
I'm showing off. So
it wasn't during an outing?
It wasn't during an outing. It was the day after
I
pitched a competitive high school game.
Okay.
Went to show off or do what I do, and it was sharp. And I just knew at that moment that was not right.
Yeah.
So back then, of course, it's just looked at as muscle soreness. So I pitched, I want to say against like Smithfield, Selma or something, and we won. But
So you kept going.
Had pain with every pitch, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I remember it was East Wake, and I pitched and we won, but there was pain the entire time. And by the time we got to the season, finally saw an orthopedist. They're going to handle it conservatively, so he gave me forearm exercises to do.
Don't forget your forearms.
He said, do wrist flexion, wrist extension, pronation, supination. I did that every day for 6 months. Didn't touch a baseball. Fall ball, first throw, no problem. By the time they got back to, 120 feet, I felt it.
Mm-hmm.
Went back, got the MRI, showed UCL rupture, had Tommy John. Fast forward, went through rehab, the traditional rehab. I think the rehab was really good. But at the end, I was handed a throwing program and wished the best of luck. In the back of my mind, there's a problem here. Like you didn't see me throw. What if my mechanics are part of the problem? We've cleaned up some physical impairments, which may be a loss of range in the elbow or muscular strength or shoulder mobility, but no one's ever seen me throw. So if the mechanics created the problem in the first place, the problem's never been addressed.
Did the pitching coach ever tell you anything when you were in high school? Like, you guys work? Did you have a coach in high school? Did you work on anything?
I had a very good coach.
Okay.
He was very fundamental.
Yeah.
He was extremely good. Jim Horgan, a lot of respect for him.
Mm-hmm.
He tried, and so his advice to me back then was, stay more pronated.
Okay.
Stay pronated longer.
Okay.
Don't get supinated early.
Makes sense. Yeah.
That was his advice, and I thought it was good advice. But
Yeah.
that's as far as it went.
Mm-hmm.
None of the medical professionals had anything to provide.
Sure.
So that stuck with me, that here is a problem in today's medicine. What can I do to solve this problem? So physical therapy, I was very interested in it. When I went to PT school, everything I did, I made about pitching. If it was neuroanatomy, how do I make this about pitching?
Sure.
If it's peds and developmental milestones and motor control, how do I make it about pitching? And so in every class, I was focused on how I can take that information and apply it to pitching. Luckily, I had a mentor too, Walt Jenkins, for shoulder and elbow rehab. He's renowned in what he's done through the years in physical therapy. And Blaze Williams, who's now one of the principal, if not the principal biomechanist at Nike headquarters. Those are my mentors. So I spent a lot of time in the 3D lab with Blaze, learning how to run the Qualis system, how to interpret 3D data. So I went, I definitely took a lot of extra steps in PT school to arm myself for what I wanted to do. And Blaze and I just talked to him yesterday. I still bank a lot of biomechanics questions off him and have a lot of deep conversations. When I go to Oregon, which is where he lives now, we get together on the slopes. Afterwards, we're talking some biomechanics and baseball, so that continues. And that never seems like work to me. It's just fun.
Yeah. I think you have a passion for it. It really doesn't have to be work.
Right. So following PT school, I worked for Terry Ortho for 7 years. During that time, got all the baseball pitchers referred to me.
That just happened by coincidence, or like it happened?
They knew the drive was there.
Yeah.
I made that known, and that's kind of where I started working outside the clinic doing pitching lessons.
Okay.
It started to direct baseball volume there, and I would see a lot of baseball pitchers, but also shoulders in general. Looking at MRIs and looking at every op report, I started seeing repetitive damage in the shoulder, repetitive damage at the elbow. And from that generated the Young stretch, the Young test for posterior superior capsule contractures, which greatly improved my treatment, not only of baseball players, but also of orthopedic patients. It didn't matter the age.
What does that do exactly, if you don't mind me asking really quick?
So the stretch will identify posterior superior capsule contractures, which a capsule encapsulates the joint in the shoulder. It's going to dictate how much or how little you can move.
Okay.
So if someone lacks the layback, well, it could be an anterior capsule tightness. If someone's lost internal rotation, it's most likely it's going to be a posterior capsule component to that. More specifically, posterior superior is where I was seeing all this damage. MRIs would say posterior superior labral fraying, supraspinatus fraying, infraspinatus just in that region consistently. And the impression of the radiologist was, signs of internal impingement. So PT didn't really have a stretch for it. specifically. So, I developed one that takes away compensations and has worked extremely well.
Yeah, something we do, I feel like, every day,
Yeah.
a lot.
It cleans up internal impingement really well.
And can you do that any age, you said?
Yes.
Yeah.
You really need I wouldn't just do it on my own because it can be very painful. It needs to be applied correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's steps to take to even get to there. But I wouldn't just do it. But yes, it can be done at any age when prescribed appropriately.
Yeah.
But also I'd spend, reading these op reports, these MRIs, having the experience of treating the patient, whether it was going the way I planned it to or not. I would spend a lot of time with these orthopedic surgeons who were very, very good, and further develop the treatment plan for pitchers. And I wanted to understand the anatomy and functional anatomy to the level of an orthopedist. And how you do that is you run into problems and you ask them. And luckily, folks like Dr. Carroll, he would completely draw it out and explain it to me. And that's continued to be a very good relationship today. And he took time to really try to teach me, as well as Martini and Rinke and all of those guys. After those 7 years, I moved on to Impact Orthopedics, worked for Dr. Rob Jones, and continued to hone those skills. He's also one of the best orthopedic surgeons at knee, shoulder, and he continued to work with me and further develop protocols and great ways to treat baseball pitchers, shoulders, elbows alike.
Yeah.
When you first started doing the pitching lessons, obviously the focus was biomechanics. Where did the drive for velocity come from? Was that just the results you were getting from the biomechanics being better? Obviously it was injury prevention, but where did the drive for velocity come from?
That's a great question. The drive was never velocity.
Right.
So by fixing mechanics, enhance velocity, and a lot of there's not an article on baseball pitching biomechanics that I have not read.
Yeah.
I followed Glenn Fleissig at American Sports Medicine Institute, and I went to the injuries in baseball course they had 3-4 years, and I would go to their baseball biomechanics breakout session, and I just got a lot of meat off the bone in those sessions, and it gave me a research-based platform to build what we have today in the 8 cylinders of pitching. And
Bobby, you can probably speak on this too. I know growing up, like pitching lessons, like you were learning how to command the zone or throwing off speed and all this stuff. So like obviously when I got to high school is when I first heard about you and the infamous holding the radar gun up, and I was like, all right, this is different. This guy's really good. Like, how did he learn all this stuff? So it was awesome. It was really fun to learn about.
I can remember when I was a kid, again, coaches, a lot of them mean so well, and that doesn't mean they're good. And I think that's something that a lot of people need to realize, like, just because it's a good coach and he's a great guy and you really have a good relationship doesn't mean he's teaching them big stuff.
Or he made it so far in the big leagues.
Yeah, it doesn't. There's a lot of people that played in the big leagues that claim to be great coaches, and they're not. Like, it doesn't matter where you play. It's about how you can learn the information you're given, how you can regurgitate that information and go from there. But quick story, like I can remember being in the garage and we had a 2x4 with marks on it, how far I could stride out basically, and I just tried to stride as far as I possibly could. And did that lead to good habits? Probably not. I was able to overcome some of them, I guess, but that in today's understanding of biomechanics is probably not the best way of going about how to throw hard or trying to be healthy. So I think a lot of people, just because doesn't mean you're getting the right instruction.
Sure.
It is just insane how much it's evolved, because I know when I was in high school, like this was the only place I'd ever heard of that did stuff like this.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, it's been almost 10 years now, but
you're old now.
Yeah. There's a lot of places that attempt to do this stuff, but I still think like we were so far ahead. I mean, obviously you started before anybody, so.
What? And I want to ask you too, like kind of just briefly, with your understanding of biomechanics now, how would you diagnose your own TJ? Like, what would you tell how old are you, 15, 16?
I was 17.
17. What would you tell a 17-year-old Brandon Young now today?
Well, don't long toss to max effort the day after you pitch. And that wasn't the coach's fault. I thought, like I said, Jim Horgan was really good. I think he was ahead of his time, where he was very protective and managed pictures extremely well.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to go back and analyze my own mechanics.
You were watching it. Do you have any video or anything?
I do. It's difficult with the angles because they're back behind home plate. The cameras aren't as good. The frame rates, which is, it brings us to another point, is the evolution of equipment here.
Yeah.
You know, starting out, it was sports CAD software and a high-speed camera, which then was 60 frames per second. And I would break it down based on what I learned from ASMI and Glenn Fleissig and that group. And
Which 60 frames per second, that's if you were to take just a normal video pretty much, right?
Correct.
That's 60 frames. Yeah.
yeah.
And now it gets up to what, like 240?
With the iPhone is 240
240,
now?
yeah. So, I mean, it's
crazy.
unreal.
So it started with that, and always a radar gun.
Mm-hmm.
Why a radar gun? Well, we're not just velocity driven. That's not the purpose of the radar gun. The radar gun is an objective measure to tell us what we're applying is making a change.
Making progress.
Yeah.
If we're connecting the kinetic chain, then we will see a velocity increase at the same effort level. So, you know, there is some accountability there too with the radar gun present, which I was never afraid of. I faced that sword since day one.
Yeah.
That I just wasn't telling clients, hey, he was throwing harder today. No, I would always be able to prove it. And when velocity dropped, I always had some explanation that was honest.
Yeah.
Whether it's I don't know, or is he working at home, or what we're giving him is not the right thing. We need to go in a different direction. Right. So it was always facing the facts, right? And so I found a limitation in that equipment. It's a problem. What's the solution? Go up to the next step. So I got this little AM sensor that did X, Y, and Z axis, and I put it right here on the T-spine.
Okay.
And so the torso is obviously proven, research proven, is a big part of the engine. So I would get 3D data from that, and it brought the ceiling of what I could do higher. So the results improved. Then I started hitting my head on the ceiling and having questions that I couldn't answer. So the next step was going to be the heavyweight champion Colossus, which that's what's used at universities. It is the gold standard in 3D technology. It is accurate to a sub-millimeter. Colossus doesn't pay me. You know, it's just is what it is.
It's a good shout out.
It's a good shout out. But it was time to acquire the 3D system. And then, to be able to custom build the report, which we have done and changed over the last 8 years as we have learned more, the ceiling was even higher.
Yeah.
Well, then we want to learn more about what's happening with the legs and ground reaction forces. So here comes the AMTI force plates. And this season we're faced with more questions. So there will be more technology on the way. You guys are going to love it. It's going to help us to add yet another layer into solving some of these really difficult problems.
Yeah.
And so learning that the eyes can't do it, and a high-speed camera is also going to miss a ton, you need 3D data, force plates. You need as much input as possible to build the appropriate program for performance or for someone coming back from an injury, or explain why you got hurt in the first place. There's a lot of people that go through rehab and impairments may be cleaned up, may not. Depends on who you see. If it's baseball, it's a heavy baseball-specific physical therapist. I feel like they should be good. But that's been my passion. If those impairments aren't cleaned up, you may get hurt again. If your mechanics are creating the problem, you haven't solved it. There's been no change.
Well,
So
we've seen, even 2D, as good as it is, there's still things that can be missed. And then you put them under the microscope and it's like, all right, there it is. Now we've laid it out. Now we attack it. I think that's, for me, that's how I learned the best, was sitting in during the 3D reviews and then obviously seeing somebody that looked really good 2D and then seeing the numbers being like, now I can kind of see that, you know what I mean? So
yeah, I think that's what we've hit on it before too. It allows us to realize there is no cookie cutter way. There's someone does something really well that someone else might suck at, and we can learn that like that basically with the technology that we have. And so, for guys that are making these programs here, at BYoung Performance, we're able to get I wish you guys could see how detailed these reports are. It's literally to the, millidegree or whatever it's called?
Sub-millimeter.
Sub-millimeter, that is just, it's way over my head. So to have that and to understand the data is just, it's unbelievable. And we see it every day about guys making improvements, and it's just, to me, being in player development is so awesome to see these guys, because we get the data and then we can program for them, and then we can see them potentially maybe live their dream out, and give them every little possible tool that we have to further their career.
As an instructor, for me, I mean, like with our programs now, we're doing a 3D when you get here. So we see right after the season what your body and everything's doing after you shut down. And then when you're done with your program, you're doing an exit 3D.
Yeah.
So it's our test. It's our final exam, right? We get to see if what we did worked, or if it's something that we need to continue to build on, or if we need to attack something else. So
like we're not just like saying, okay, you did their 3D, we fixed it, bye. No, we're gonna, like Chris said, like we're putting ourselves to the test.
We're critiquing you and also ourselves. Yeah,
we're seeing what we did for you. It's not just, hey, here's your 3D, sick, leave.
Yeah.
We're seeing if we actually did some stuff.
I think that's the most, if not, it's definitely one of the most important points, Bobby, is that even what I did 20 years ago with radar gun and a camera is still done today, because we are all held to that standard. We know we do that first 3D, and we're going to program for them, and at the end we're going to do another one. And depending on what happens, we have to face that fire.
Right.
If they didn't get better, why? But we can answer those questions now with the technology and the knowledge that we have. Yeah. And I like that. And if not, then we get better from it, versus just blindly going through a program with no true measurement. And to further the point of the equipment and why you measure an athlete, would you build a home without a land survey?
No.
A soil test? Your home wouldn't be square. I mean, that's why you survey. That's why you measure things so that you can make them as perfect as possible. That's the first step. Well, athletes need to be measured, and we have the latest and the greatest, and that'll continue to be the trend here, because measuring allows you to know where they are.
Yeah. And
then the plan is just so focused and direct. That's why I think this past off season we've had our best results.
Yep.
Where 95% of the guys went up big.
Yeah.
And we can explain why.
Right. I loved every bit about this off season. We spoke to it on our first episode. Like, had so much fun, man.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it was just such a blast to see those guys, and we got really lucky too with a really good group that wanted to be in here and wanted to be in here a long time. Whether that be working, hard or playing mini hoops or whatever. We just had a good time, man. And like, I was so grateful for that.
Well, I mean, you're coming in here doing the same thing every day. You come over, you do your prep work, you're stretching. So it's fun for those guys to be able to relax a little bit. And it's fun to see them, even when they're done doing what they did, like they wanted to stay, they wanted to hang out and do whatever. So I think just speaking on the culture, like that was...
Yeah, the vibe was perfect, and I had such a great time with those guys. I'm excited to have them back in, and I want them to go do well, and I want them all to pitch in the World Series, obviously, but definitely miss them, and excited for them to kind of get back in and get back to work. Brandon, this was a question from one of our staff that wanted to be asked. So just take your standard guy, okay? Like your standard Joe Smith, let's say, 15, 16 years old. What red flags could you see for a potential injury or just not the best arm health going forward? What is something like with 2D you could be like, oh, okay, I could point to that and say we need to work on that? Is there like a few specific red flags? And again, I know it's kind of a tough question to ask because everyone's so different, but like, is there something that you can point to and say, okay, we could maybe fix that at like 85% of the time?
With 2D?
Yeah.
Sure. Early or late arm would be the first thing that pops in my mind. If someone's foot's down and their arm is below a 33-degree level, well, that's a late arm. If someone's past 78 degrees, that's an early arm. We fix those every day. If there's a video that we put out and someone has a late or early arm and they've been with us, you best believe that that's been fixed. I always see some comments on there, oh, his arm is late. Yeah, that video was a while back. That's been fixed, and that guy's has made huge strides, and you're gonna see that name.
And speak on that too. I mean, a lot of people have their own description of late or early arms. We
Yeah.
measure right when the front foot gets to full front foot contact, right? Now,
Yeah, it was
Like
like
full weight bearing.
just hits the ground. Yeah, we
Yeah.
get to full weight bearing, and then we judge
Mhm.
where the arm is.
it was initially defined by ASMI. This was years ago. That it was at foot contact. That was their parameters. If you think about it, the force really starts being generated once that foot is flat and starts to brace. That's when you're going to get some heavy kinetic energy coming up the chain, and you don't want the arm to be late at that point. You also don't want it to be early.
Yeah. What do you think the biggest indicator is when you turn on the 3D for guys throwing hard, like at a high level? What is something that you see that everybody for the most part does?
That arm trails and lays
Yeah.
back well.
Yeah, I was hoping you said that because I want to talk about just horizontal abduction as a whole. Like, when did you start to kind of see the trend in that, and can you speak to the data points? You know, what kind of information do you have on that?
So horizontal abduction has always kind of been on the radar, and understanding the kinetic sequence also helps. You know, if you think about everything moving from the ground up, you know, you front femur rotates, pelvis rotates, torso rotates, and then the arm comes through. You want that arm to trail the body to be that last component. And if you do that, you know, the arm is basically your arm is going to be your connection of what the body and the ground produces to the ball. It's really a transport. So if it doesn't trail, then you're going to cut that pathway of energy to the ball off. So I knew early on, just understanding kinematic chain and sequence, that has to be present. But in Driveline did quite a bit of work early on horizontal abduction and the arm trailing, and their findings, the more the merrier, and I agree with that.
Yeah.
You know, that arm is a huge key to higher velocities.
How do you teach that? How do you train that?
Yeah, well, I rely on Chris and you. Actually, Bobby, we struggled with that. Guys that have had labral repairs or a lot of shoulder pain, they get into a habit of having the elbow lead and they push.
That darty throw.
That darty throw. If you're watching this podcast, we can help you now. And this is a hard habit to get out of.
Yeah.
You know, first step is they can't feel pain back here. They're not going to go back there.
Yeah.
And some, I think their memory of having discomfort back there is just so ingrained. And it's a hard habit to get out of. But, you know, Isaiah Bennett is a great example. Isaiah did some really dedicated work with you.
Yeah. Well, speaking on that post-injury side, I mean, the dude threw 94 in high school as a junior in high school, and then he had Tommy John was senior year, something like that, and had some good gains on the way back. I mean, he was back up to low 90s, upper 80s, low 90s, and then like you could just still see that there was something holding him back, and the 3D showed it, right? I mean, the arm just wasn't trailing till the last second, and then all that work
Didn't help that he had some time off as well, and you know it kind of just set back his whole, I don't know if it was his rehab, but his whole development process back a year.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, the tricky part is Isaiah had the mobility.
Yeah.
So he had horizontal abduction passively and actively. And he had external rotation. You know, he had the layback component. Why is the arm not trailing? And there is a motor plan issue. That's a neuromuscular issue. And that, when you get to that point, that's up here. And it, you know, you guys had several months of dedicated work before you left for spring training.
Yep.
But the work that you did with him, obviously, he's had a great impact. And
Yeah. And he's pitching at Queens right now, and Isaiah, like, one of my favorite human beings on this planet. I mean, talk about a kid that just wants to be great and works his ass off. Like, that's one of those kids that you pull for and you pull for hard. You know, big fan of him and everything he's been through, man. Like, that kid, he deserves everything he's getting right now. So, Isaiah, big fan of you, man, and excited to see what your future holds.
definitely.
You know, I guess what a lot of people are probably thinking right now is, I can't do this. I have this, that, or whatever excuse they want to come up with. Is this genetic, or can it be learned, do you think?
Horizontal abduction?
Well, just everything. I mean, I think just
the ability to
throw 90,
baseball hard.
Yeah, throw a baseball hard. I mean, so many guys just, it's not in the cards for me. I'm going to give up. I'm done.
You know,
that happens all the time.
Everyone has a definitive ceiling. but we don't know where that is.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it takes a ton of effort to find that. But if the passion and the drive is there, we can help anyone find that ceiling, wherever it may be.
I think that's a good segue out of here, man. I kind of wanted to mention just a few things that we're doing here. Like, we had just had a study with ECU. And there's more studies to come. And I guess the point of me saying that is, like, this place is so awesome in the fact that we're always looking for something. There's no smartest guy in the room mentality. Everybody is all pulling for each other, and we're trying to learn as much as we possibly can. I mean, we just had a meeting not too long ago that you brought us up to, and then all of the great things that we have planned, coming into this next year as we wait for these guys to come back from college or their high school season, just getting going pro, and all the things that we're excited to kind of implement into our training and to our programming, and how it's going to make a huge difference as we go forward. And we have another meeting next week. This place, it never stops. The will to be great is in each and every one of us, and I think, Brandon, that's something that you kind of instilled in a lot of these guys is that want to. So, Brandon, I want to thank you for being on here, man. So, you guys, if you ever see somebody one-wheeling through your neighborhood, it's probably Brandon Young. Brandon, you got anything on the way out?
No, but every great business starts with solving a problem. And you know what? We continue to solve those. And the staff here is handpicked, and it is by far the best staff. Like, everyone here is smarter than me in something, and they're put in a position to shine. Very excited about where we are, and I'm equally excited to see where we're going. So,
Well said.
thanks for having me on the podcast.
No, man, of course. This is your deal. So, guys, don't forget your forums and make good decisions.
Always.